Greetings, folks, and welcome to the Game Audio Institute and our audio scripting shorts series and stuff like that. This is, we're going to continue on with our Footsteps project. We already sort of got things prepared with our last one, and so we're going to continue on right now, and we're going to talk about why animators are important for this particular kind of situation. We'll see you right in there. And in our last video, we just more or less explained the conceptual basis and showed you how to make an animation event. And it's very important that you understand where this is all being triggered. So what's happening is what's going on is that there's an object. This object here is actually, I think, called player armature. So when you click on player armature, you're going to get a component that you need to pay attention to called the animator. The animator has what's called a controller on it. A controller is an asset, kind of like the audio mixer is an asset and things like that. And audio clips are assets as well. So this is a thing that's permanent to your project. It's not temporary or anything like that. And the idea is that it sits over here and is the controller for this kind of game. Now, if you go to the Animator tab, you can actually see some information about how this is all being kind of put together. And we're going to talk a little bit about that sort of stuff. In this case, what we have is a base layer. And the base layer pretty much essentially looks at a couple of things. It can do things like jumping and running and stuff like that, which is a useful thing. Let's see if I'll show you a little bit better. Yeah, there you go. So you've got jumping and running and things like that. We're only going to be looking at this idle, walk, run, blend. Okay, so if you double click that, now if you have that, now you have these other entries that are here. And this is where we're going to be talking about. So let's just say you were going to edit your walk event, or you're going to bring in a different walk event or something like that. You can basically stick in this walk in over here, and over here in the blend tree, the references are given to the various animations. So you have, let's say, your walk in copy that you made, and you can select it here, and now walk in copy is that particular animation. All right. So let's get to the scripting. I know we've been spending a lot of time on this, but let's get to the scripting and talk a little bit about that sort of stuff, essentially. So, and now what we want to do is sort of create the conditions for stuff. So what I'm going to make is we're going to go over here to our player armature object, right? That's the one we want. And we are going to add ourselves a component that we really, really need. And we're not going to use any of these right now. We will need some of these to be talking about for sure, but we're going to click Add Component here. And the component we definitely want, actually, let's roll up this one here too so you can see what we're talking about. We're going to basically add in an audio source, of course. That makes sense. So we're going to add an audio source so that we can actually play our sounds. That's going to be useful. But we're also going to add ourselves a new script. And this script is going to be called Footstep Manager. I think I'll just call it Footstep Manager. Okay, so there it is, Footstep Manager. Brand new script. Nothing else there. So we have our thing, and we're going to double click that, and that is going to open up this. Oops, sorry, not that. Where are we at? It's over here. Visual Studio Code, Footstep Manager. There we go. So now I have some other things that we have to deal with this, but we're going to basically do a couple of things. So the main issue that we have is an animation event. Do you remember what we called the animation event? Well, I think it was called Play Footstep, right? So that's called Play Footstep. So we've got a few things we'll probably want to maybe click keep start. I think it's going to be useful. But for right now, let's just get started and talk about what we're going to need from this. Well, we're definitely going to need an audio clip, an audio source, right? So we'll call this an audio source. And of course we could hardwire this and, you know, tell it to use its own local audio source, but let's just call this audio source, and we're going to call this public audio source so we can drag it over. That's going to be a useful thing. So public audio source, footstep source. Foot source, let's see. Call it foot source, okay? And then we're going to be making audio clips. So public audio clip list. Remember, it's a list. We're going to be playing list. So it's an audio clip, and then those two square bracket characters just to the right of the letter P. Okay, so public audio clip, and this is going to be the surface for tile steps. Okay, and then we're going to make another one for audio clip list metal steps. Good. Getting ourselves pretty well started here. So now the next thing that we want to do is just do that, essentially. Now, we'll see how well this is going to go. We haven't added our second animation clip or our animation event yet, but we have our first one, which is called Play Footstep, I believe, yes? Okay, so that's going to be the two things that we need. We are also going to need a reference to the third-person controller, or the character controller, I should say. Well, no, I think it is actually the third-person controller. That's right. So we're going to say public third-person controller. Now, this is going to be weird, because if you do this, you're going to end up with an error, and it's not going to work because it does not know what the third-person controller is, because the third-person controller has to do with, I'm going to call this the player because technically it's the actual player object. So what we're going to do is we need to actually add a namespace, and in this particular case, okay, so for this one, what we want to do is we're going to be using something called starter assets. So everything you see here at the top, these are called namespaces. So in order to be able to get certain kinds of functions, like for example, if you wanted to do the audio mixer snapshots and stuff like that, that requires a special namespace called unityengine.audio. In this case, we're going to be using starter assets. And I believe it's actually, yep, that's what it shows up as. So I want to say starter assets, and if I do that, then third-person controller will be recognized. If I don't do that, it's going to definitely have some complaints, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to basically make it so that we are going to play the event that needs to happen. Now, here's a very important thing to understand, is that when you have an animation event, the animation event has to trigger on a game object that is the same game object that the animation is basically on. So in other words, we talked about the animation controller, right? Remember the animation controller that is being played by the animator component, okay? And the animation controller then has bunches of different animations. And those animations have animation events. All of those things are located all on the player armature object, essentially. And so if I'm going to give it a function that it needs to find, it has to be in a script on that object. If I want to reference a different object afterwards, I can do that afterwards. But I'm going to have at least something that's going to hand off the function first, okay? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to call this a public void. It will not work if it's not a public void. It needs to be a public function. Again, void means that it just doesn't return anything. It's just itself, okay? So we're going to call it public void, and I think it was called play foot step. I think that was what it was called. We'll find out if that was right or not because it won't be able to trigger it. So we're going to basically do that. Now, what we could do is we can say foot source play, right? And we could just call it foot source play one shot and then give it a variable or anything like that. Or we can just call it foot source play and just put something in there. It might be a good thing to just test this out. We're 13 minutes. We don't want to run you out completely. But say play. Don't want to give capital. Is that a capital? No, I don't think it is. All right, so then go play like that. Now we have to have an audio clip there, but we can pretend to do that. That's not a big deal. We will have to create all the other stuff that we want in there, but at least this is what's often called a unit test, where you're just testing part of the logic to see if it'll even work. And the other thing you can in fact do also is you can use, one of my favorite things to use is something called debug.log. Debug.log. So debug.log is super helpful. You can basically say, you can type stuff and just have, say, footstep event triggered. And you can type something like that so that you can basically work out some logic. Now, there's a more complex way to do things by actually stepping into the code and doing all kinds of fancy programming type stuff. But this is a way of being able to check in the console to see if the logic is working correctly. And it might not be, so you never know. Let's get this, and we'll see what happens and make sure we don't have any errors. I hope we don't. Yeah, it looks good. All right, so let's just go and do this. But the first thing we need to do, we definitely need to go to the player armature. Player armature. See how it says no for source, right? Gonna do this, make the audio source happen, and just stick any old clip there, right? We just use our wood hit or beeps or whatever. We could do a million different things. It's fine. Or we could put a single footstep in there. I think I'm just gonna use a wood hit. Just a simple wood hit. Okay. And we shall see if this will work. Going on. Okay. And there we go. Yep. And don't worry about the rest of the stuff. There was some other stuff we'll have to fix after that. All right. We are out for this half. But you've got an idea of about a unit test. You know a little bit more about how things are going to be working on. We're going to get really deep into the code next one, I promise. So we'll see you again next week. Please leave a comment, like, share, subscribe. And if you feel like finding us on Patreon, you can have access to these scripts and things like that. If you wanted to find out how we were able to do all these kinds of things, it might help you in your next project. You never know. Anyway, let me know what you think in your comments, and we'll see you again. I hope this helps you get your game audio on. Take care. We'll see you next time.